Hey, what's up? I guess I'll start. I'm Jacob. I'm another teenager. I'm 16 years old, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about inventing a new method of producing hydrogen at 16 years old, as you do. But along with that, what comes with being a 16-year-old and what's arguably just as exciting is getting your driver's license. And when I got my driver's license, something I didn't realize or I couldn't fully comprehend yet was the price of gas, right? My whole life I've heard how the rising prices of gas are affecting us from my parents, from all the grown-ups in my life. But I didn't fully comprehend it yet until I actually got my license and went to fill up my car myself. I realized once I filled up my car that if I put this gas in, I drive to school, I use this much of the gas, and that's like $8 right there. That compounds over time. It gets super expensive just to drive. And what's interesting is that this wasn't really a problem, right? In the good old days, gas wasn't this expensive. And that got me interested in how we can make the good old future with emerging technologies and new sources of energy to use for driving and for other things. And because of that, I researched into more emerging technologies and sources of energy, and I came across all the usual suspects, right? Solar, nuclear, all of that cool stuff. But what really stuck out to me was hydrogen, because of how much money is going into hydrogen. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are going into hydrogen every single year from governments and private organizations. And what's super interesting about that is because hydrogen is not really a new technology. It's been around for a long time. People have always been saying that hydrogen will be an interesting prospect for the future. But the thing is, hydrogen hasn't really gotten cheaper. It's not cost effective right now. It's twice as expensive to fuel your hydrogen car as to just buy gas. Which really begs the question, why are we spending so much money on hydrogen, right? If it's not cost effective, why are we even bothering? And I used to be like old Elon over it, right? Elon doesn't like hydrogen. Maybe he's a bit biased because he likes to sell electric cars, but the sentiment is true. Hydrogen has major road barriers in front of it, right? If it's not cost effective, we don't have the infrastructure for it. Like, there's no hydrogen fueling stations all over the place that you can refill like a gas station or electric car. And the hydrogen cars to begin with are very expensive. So Elon would say, no, don't even bother with hydrogen. Yet there's still so much money going into it. And it goes along with an old joke about hydrogen. And the joke goes that hydrogen is the technology of the future. It's the energy of the future. And it always will be. And the reason why that's funny is because there's always talk about hydrogen being so good, and there's not really much action to go along with it. So what can we do about that, right? Because there's talk about hydrogen boats, planes, trains, carrying all our stuff around, only emitting water as the emissions, right? It gives us a dream of our hydrogen future where we can fuel our stuff more efficiently than electric cars just by using hydrogen. But the problem with this is that that's not really what hydrogen is. We already use hydrogen for so much other than that right now in industry. Just for producing steel, 78 megatons of hydrogen are used. 38 megatons for refining oil, 34 megatons for producing fertilizers and for agriculture. And to put that into perspective, all of the hydrogen fuel cell demand right now in the entire world yearly is a fifth of a megaton, right? So there's so much hydrogen demand already, which is why there's so much money going into it. It's already expensive, we already use it, so it doesn't matter what the outlook for the future is of hydrogen. We can argue about whether a hydrogen plane will make sense all day, but we need cheaper hydrogen right now because we're using it today. Even worse, along with this, another roadblock in the way of hydrogen is that it's actually not that friendly for the environment, right? Part of selling it, part of getting money into it is basically advertising, hey, this is a good option for the environment. It's better than fossil fuels. But if you look at it, even the most green sources of hydrogen really aren't that environmentally friendly, because it all comes down to where you're sourcing your hydrogen from. You can drive your hydrogen car and just emit water, but it really matters where you're getting that hydrogen from, because hydrogen, H2, does not just float around in the air. It likes to bond with other things, so we have to separate it from that. So let's think about where can we get hydrogen, right? Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It shouldn't be that hard, right? let's think back to maybe chemistry class, or when you learned about kind of what makes up the universe, right? Obvious options, hydrogen's all over the earth, right? Let's think, maybe some people would say a good source of hydrogen, we can't survive without it, right? And if you're thinking that water is this good source, you would be wrong, and that's not where we source our hydrogen from. And it's a bit too obvious, because water as a molecule is hard to break. And in fact, where we source our hydrogen from is from methane. So we source our hydrogen from methane, like what the cows were, and not the water where it's from, which covers the earth, which is really strange. And to get this methane, we have to get it from natural gas, oil, which ends up meaning that instead of using fresh, clean water like that for the hydrogen economy, it looks like this, where we're getting our hydrogen from, burning oil. And that's about as good for the environment as it looks, right? We can talk about hydrogen being good all day, but if this is what the product is, if this is where we're going to get it from, it's really not going to be that effective, especially because it's already not cost effective. So the reason why water does not work so well as a source of hydrogen comes down to the actual molecular makeup of the compound. Water is hard to break, and electronegativity is pretty much the measurement of how easy or how hard it is a molecule is to break. And water with an electronegativity rating of 1.4 costs about $5 per kilogram. And methane with an electronegativity rating of 0.45 costs about $2 per kilogram. So you can see, as electronegativity rating goes down, the price goes down with it, because that's just due to how easy it is to break up the compound. But even at $2 per kilogram, methane is still too expensive to use properly. So what can we do about this, right? This is an unconventional problem. Just like solar, this is an unconventional problem because methane is producing a lot of CO2 emissions, 870 megatons annually for the whole hydrogen economy. So all hydrogen that's being produced is measured at 870 megatons of CO2 annually. And to put that into perspective, that's about as much as commercial aviation, right? At 900 megatons, our hydrogen, which is supposed to be the future, is producing as many bad emissions as aviation. So what can we do about that, right? And I like to compare it to solar, because it's an unconventional problem like what solar solved for renewable energies. Because there's energy everywhere, right? We get energy from the sun. All energy comes from the sun on Earth. Solar did a great job of harnessing that energy because it's free, basically coming from sunlight, right? And it's the same thing with hydrogen. There's hydrogen everywhere. Again, it's the most abundant element in the universe. So what sources of hydrogen can we use that aren't immediately clear, that we haven't used before? And to do that, the source of hydrogen is hydrogen sulfide. And hydrogen sulfide is a compound that comes off of sewage treatment plants, composting facilities. Pretty much any biological decomposition that happens, it will produce hydrogen sulfide. And the thing with hydrogen sulfide is, like solar energy, it's pretty much free. What the plants do with it is nothing. In fact, the plants where all of this hydrogen sulfide is being produced, they have to pay millions and millions of dollars just to get rid of it. It's toxic, it's flammable. You can't just release hydrogen sulfide into the air. So they're paying to get rid of it. They're paying to scrub it, and they're paying to get rid of a good source of hydrogen. And even better about hydrogen sulfide is that it has a lower electronegativity rating than even methane. So at 0.4, theoretically, it's much easier to break than even methane. So what can we do about that? Wow, that all sounds great, right? But why aren't we using hydrogen sulfide as a source of fuel right now? And that comes down to two big problems, right? Hydrogen sulfide, like methane, has a similar problem in what you do with the sulfur when you take the hydrogen away from it, right? We can't just release sulfur. Sulfur likes to bond with other organic elements to form greenhouse gases, which can actually be worse than carbon-based greenhouse gases. So we need something to do with the sulfur once we're done with it. And second, there isn't really a catalyst to break down hydrogen sulfide. So when you have something like methane, you can burn it, and that'll break apart the compound. When you have something like water, you can run electricity through it, it'll break apart the compound. There isn't something like that for hydrogen sulfide. So really, some people would think it's a problem with technology, right? We just don't have the right technology for it yet. And this is where my love for microbiology comes in really clutch, because I say that, yeah, we have the right technology for it, and we're not using it. And that technology is purple sulfur bacteria. And that might not sound like technology, but if you think about it, purple sulfur bacteria, as an organism, are optimized to break down hydrogen sulfide. They've evolved over billions of years to do exactly what we need. Purple sulfur bacteria are so old, they're so old that they come from a time before there was even oxygen in the atmosphere. So they had to survive off of hydrogen sulfide. They photosynthesized without oxygen. They broke apart hydrogen sulfide, took the sulfur for themselves, used it to reproduce, make more of the bacteria, and then they released the extra hydrogen. So really, it comes down to how can we get these bacteria, which already do the thing we need, to do it more. And that comes down to growing them, because it's a scale of how much bacteria you have will produce the exact same amount of hydrogen based off of how much you have in a container, right? So the problem with this is, how can we grow enough of this bacteria to actually put in a bioreactor to turn into our hydrogen needs? And unfortunately, there's not really study or paper on that, which is why I'm growing purple sulfur bacteria in my bathroom, because we have to figure it out ourselves here, right? And to understand why a cylinder of rotting mud can give us a glimpse into our future of hydrogen, we really have to understand why purple sulfur bacteria are so good at what they do. And that comes down to the biochemistry of it. And this part is really the boring part, but it's the crux of the idea. So I'm going to explain it real quick. Of course, I can nerd out about it all forever, right? If you want to talk about it later, I will. But in 30 seconds, I'm going to explain to you how this matters and why this is so important for producing hydrogen. Because if you look at this equation, stoichiometrically it's not balanced, right? There's carbon that's not accounted for in this equation. And this is because there's actually different routes that the carbon can go through when it goes through the bacteria. So off of the photosynthesis equation, it can go through glycolysis and then the glyoxylate cycle, which is where it can be turned into carbon that can be used for reproducing from the bacteria. So when the bacteria copies itself, it needs carbon, so it takes some of it from what it photosynthesizes with to reproduce itself. And then also, it can go through the Calvin and Krebs cycle and then be turned into sugars that it can use to sustain itself off of too. So it doesn't necessarily just need photosynthesis energy, because when it's good, when it's having a good time and it has all the resources it needs, it just makes sugars and stores it for them. And why this matters is because there's two different routes that carbon can actually go through when it goes through this bacteria. And when the bacteria is optimized and is growing in the right conditions, it will take extra carbon and store it, potential carbon sink, and then it will just release the extra hydrogen, which is why we have to optimize for growing these bacteria and making them as happy as possible. Because they already do what we need. We don't have to gene edit them or do anything crazy with them. We just have to optimize them so that they have the right equation and they're getting more carbon and they're using more carbon than the hydrogen that's attached to them. Which is why a 16-year-old can design a simple bioreactor that can do this, because really it's about researching the bacteria, finding out what they like, and then just doing it. And with a bioreactor like this, the possibilities are endless for why this can be useful. Because firstly, it can be used to take in hydrogen sulfide that we're really throwing away, paying to throw away, and turn it into hydrogen, but also it's scalable. These bacteria are like little tiny catalysts that we can put a little bit of them in a container and move around. So, for example, on your steel production plant, right? One of the main reasons why you use hydrogen in the plant is because hydrogen is so hard to transport and move. It's hard to compress, it's dangerous, it's flammable. People are scared to move around hydrogen, which is why it's easier to compress natural gas and bring it to your plant where you need hydrogen, and then just burn the natural gas there and use the hydrogen right there. But with a bioreactor, with these bacteria in it, you can move this bioreactor to your plant, and as long as you have a source of hydrogen sulfide, which you can tap into through the sewer systems, you have a source of hydrogen right there, without needing to transport it or go through all the logistics of that. And then from there, we can get into hydrogen cars, some more future applications of hydrogen, some more interesting things. We can scale out our infrastructure of where you can actually power your hydrogen cars if you have the ability for the hydrogen to be produced right there and not have to transport it. And then from there, we can get into all the crazy stuff like hydrogen planes, boats, trains. If we have that cheap source of hydrogen, and if we have a renewable and clean source of hydrogen, this will take off way better than it ever did before. So, without thinking about the other reasons why this is needed, the most important reason and the most impactful reason why this could be useful is because it's a new way of looking at the idea. Which is why I think instead of having gray hydrogen from methane or green hydrogen from water, I think in the future it should be purple, because we need a new angle to look at this, and we have a source of hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide that we're not using. So if you see purple hydrogen in the future, if you start hearing about it, you'll know you heard it from that kid at South by Southwest. So thank you. I'm down to talk about anything, and I'm sure everyone else is too.